And this is all about the 5 steps for preparing to speak. The first step is choosing and narrowing your topic, which you're in the process of right now. So the first step for that is knowing the speaking assignment, which we went over, for example, the demonstration speech, the process speech. And the thing is, I'll use that as an example a lot today, but these are steps for any speech, not just the speech you're about to give. But I tend to do that because it's the one right in front of you. So the first thing you have to do is know what's expected of you. Know that this speech is 4 to 6 minutes long. You know, if you're giving a speech at commencement, let's say, or a speech at a funeral, or a speech at a business meeting, know how long you're expected to speak. You don't want to give up and be the 20-minute commencement speaker. Everyone will want to kill you. Nobody wants to listen for that long. So knowing what is expected. The second is to understand your audience. And we'll spend, I think, all of next week on the audience thing. The textbook devotes a great deal of time to understanding your audience. And I want you to remember and hear, and a lot of you did this in your introductory speeches, direct the speech to your classmates, not just to me. Because even though that's fake and you know they're not going to see it, if you were giving the speech in class, that's exactly what would be going on. So knowing who's in your audience, what is appropriate for that audience to hear, what age level, what socioeconomic level, what level of education. Like if you're talking to, let's say you're in the medical profession, and you're speaking to a group of fellow medical professionals, you will speak differently to them than you would a layperson. So thinking about who you're speaking to. With this speech, for example, you would want to think about what would my classmates want to hear about? What's applicable to them? You probably would not be giving a speech to a group of college freshmen about how to plan for retirement or how to go buy your dream house. That's not the stage of life you're at. If you are, good for you. But you want to make it applicable to them. The third is obviously to choose an appropriate topic, something that would matter, something that would have an impact, and something that you know about. The fourth is huge, and we'll speak about it quite a bit. You need to determine the general purpose, the specific purpose, and the thesis. Now, we talked briefly last week, I believe, about the general purpose. Do you remember the 3 possible general purposes of a speech? To inform, to entertain, to persuade. Okay? So, it's this simple, and you're going to write this. Can you see this? I think it's backwards. You're going to write this at the top of your outline. It's just this simple. The general purpose for this speech, for example, is to inform. And that's all you write. You don't say what you're going to inform us about. It's just to inform. That's the general purpose. The next thing, though, to determine, and this helps guide the speech, because if you don't have a purpose for the speech, you're not going to construct the speech appropriately. So the specific purpose is what you want the audience to know or be able to do by the end of the speech. And I think the best way to write that is with this. By the end of my speech, the audience will, and then fill that in. So it's very specific about what your goal is for the audience. How about the thesis? You all have trafficked in thesis writing, I would imagine, for several years now, in English classes, far and wide. What is a thesis statement?
It's your purpose.
Yeah.
Why you're writing or speaking or doing something.
Exactly. It's the message that you want to send in the speech or in an essay. And I always tell, especially my writing students, think of the thesis as you have to be able to lift it out of the paper, and independently of the paper, it makes sense and it clearly describes what that paper is about. And so the same is true. It's a declarative statement of what the speech is about. And in a speech like this, it can be just as explicit as, in this speech, I will teach you how to, or it can be a little bit more crafty than that. Somebody think of a possible speech. Doesn't have to be the one you're going to give, but if you were going to teach us how to do something for the process speech, what's a possible topic you might do? Yeah.
How to make food.
How to make food. Give me a specific food. It'll be fun.
Cabbage rolls.
What'd you say?
Cabbage rolls.
Cabbage rolls?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Are there, okay, so I don't know anything about cabbage rolls. Sound delicious. But how could you craft cabbage rolls, which would be the topic? How would you craft that into a thesis? What about if you start it like this? To make delicious cabbage rolls, you need to, are there some basic steps you could articulate there?
Yes.
Okay, are they really detailed? Kind of?
Kind of.
What if you said, cabbage rolls are delicious and can be made in these simple steps? Okay, and then you don't have to tell us then what the steps are, but you'll go on to do that. So you said, basically, I'm going to teach you how to make cabbage rolls in these simple steps, which is also could be the thesis. I'm a big fan, huge fan, of attaching a preview of main points to the thesis. In fact, I'm not just a fan of it, I demand it. But in a process speech, when you could have 20 different steps, you're not going to list them all in the thesis. So saying that there are steps involved would be enough to preview the main points. Okay? So a thesis is the message you're trying to send. And it needs to be a single declarative sentence. In this speech, I will. So the purpose, the specific purpose really focuses on the audience. The thesis focuses on you. What are you going to do in the speech? Okay? In the speech, I'll teach you how to make delicious cabbage rolls in these 3 steps, or these simple steps. That makes sense? The thesis has to be clear. In the outline, which we'll talk about a lot, and I'm going to give you a template for the outline so you don't have to, you can just fill it in with your stuff. But you will write the general purpose, the specific purpose, and the thesis at the top of the outline before you get into the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. But we'll get to that. The 5th step is to demonstrate ethical behavior through the process. What do you think that means? How do you need to be ethical as you work on a speech? Or how could you be unethical? That'd be easier.
Talk about an inappropriate topic.
Yeah, being inappropriate, offensive. Those are unethical things. What else is unethical as you go about preparing a speech? Yes.
Being offensive or rude.
Yeah, being rude, being like stereotyping, making derogatory comments about a certain group, using bad language that's not appropriate to your audience. What else? What about lying? What about making stuff up that isn't real, right? Like, what if Liana made up some story about her grandma's cabbage rolls and all this, and she didn't even have a grandma who ever made them? It's a lie. It's okay to tell a hypothetical story, or say, let's say I had a grandma. That's different than my dear grandma. It's a lie. And people lie in speeches all the time, especially high school kids who are competing. They just make stuff up, make up evidence, make up dates, make up things that happen. That's unethical. But man, it can get you a good win if you're crafty. They aren't the only ones who lie. I think we all know that. So you don't want to lie. You don't want to be offensive. You don't want to be rude. You also don't want to steal. What is stealing other people's work called? Plagiarism, which is the cardinal sin around here, folks. You can flunk out of a class because of plagiarism. And the fancy way we do it is when you submit your outline to me, it goes through this thing called Safe Assign that checks your outline against every other outline that's submitted and everything that's ever been put online. And then I get an originality report and I can see every place your stuff came from, which is great. So, if you steal an entire outline or an entire piece of work from someone else, that's global plagiarism. That means you took an entire work and said it was yours. So if you go to your fraternity and say, hey, does anybody have a process speech? And they go to their little file cabinet and say, here's one, they will catch you. So don't do that. And it's wrong, it's unethical. Or you could do patchwork plagiarism where you take bits and pieces from different places, put that together and say it's yours. Or something I call accidental plagiarism is when you quote a source, you use evidence from a source and you just forget to attribute it to the source. Then there's self-plagiarism, which is using something you've done for another class and using it in here. However, if you report it, if you come to me and say, hey, look, I've done this whole project in biology and I'd like to use part of that for this, for my informative speech, would that be okay? It won't be the exact same thing. If I say okay, then it's okay. But if you do it and try to slide under the radar, you'll get caught because it'll find it on Safe Assign. And it's wrong if your instructor doesn't allow it. 99% of the time, I will allow it. Because I think you can use, it's never going to be the exact same thing. And if you've done the research, I don't have a problem with that. But some instructors are hardcore about it. So you've got to be ethical. That's my little ethical sermon, because the plagiarism thing is a huge deal, especially at this level of education. Okay? All right. So you choose and narrow your topic. Next, you develop the content. Another thing we'll spend at least a week on. What kinds of things do you do to back up main points in a speech? What kinds of things do you find? You find facts. Indisputable, empirical things that are verifiable. So you can use facts. You can use statistics. And statistics can be fantastic, but not if you use too many of them. And if you don't make them relatable. In fact, that's kind of the mantra for this whole part of this developing content. Think of it as a buffet. You don't want to just use facts or just use statistics. You want to sprinkle a little bit of everything. Get an assortment. So you've got facts, you've got statistics. What else might you use to back up what you're saying? Not necessarily in the process speech, because that's you. But when you do research speeches, what kind of stuff can you look for?
You could reference, if there have been studies on what you're writing about, you could reference studies.
Absolutely. Studies, expert testimony, which kind of goes with expert opinion. What else? Especially if you're teaching us how to do something, what are you doing? Yeah, Anna.
Background knowledge.
Yeah, you have your own background knowledge. And you've got to, especially if you're telling us how to, you're going to explanation. And examples. Stories. We remember stories more than anything. If Leanna did have this grandma who made the cabbage rolls, we would remember, oh, she had the grandma. And then we remember it more than just randomly, here's a cabbage roll. If you attach meaning to something, it's much more memorable. So telling the story, if you're going to teach us how to do something, tell us a story that involves that, and it will stick with us more. Or giving examples of how to use it, or what to do with it. So that's all stuff, that's what you're going to say in the meat of the speech. What am I going to say to explain all this? How can I back it up? Okay, so that's step 2. Step 3 is the monster outlining the speech, organizing the speech. And this is something that you know how to do because you've done it in essays probably since you were a freshman in high school, if not earlier. But I will hammer it home because it's a huge part of your grade on every speech. And it's the thing that you need to get more than anything else that I teach you, besides how to speak well. And it's how to organize. So a good introduction. What does a good introduction begin with? Well, it says right there. You want the hook. You want to capture the audience's attention. What are some ways to do that?
Quotes, questions.
Quotes. Asking a question.
Stories, like you can start off with a story and then
Stories, good. Wonderful. Statistics can start, some kind of startling statement. What you never start with, and from here on out, you will not start with this, because I know who you are now, and I especially know because your name pops up when I look at your videos, so I definitely know. Don't say your name. Don't say, hi, my name is, and I'm from. That's over. You did that in the introductory speech. From now on, the first words out of your mouth are your capture. You're capturing our attention. And the other thing to really be mindful of, because we tend to do this, we tend to put in some little hedge words before the capture, like, so, anyway, and you don't even know you do it until you watch and you see that you've put some little filler word in before the actual capture. The first sentence needs to have some zip. It needs to grab our attention. The other thing about it is whatever you do to capture our attention has to relate to the topic somehow. If you're giving a speech on abortion, you're not going to start with a joke about a priest and a rabbi walking into a bar. Okay, it doesn't make any sense. You have to make it connect. So these have to connect to the topic, and that's what happens next. The next step is you want to motivate your audience to keep paying attention and to care. So if I use the cabbage rolls, for example, you might start with, who here loves cabbage? No one raises their hand. You never know. And then say, believe it or not, you might love cabbage more than you ever thought possible. And what that did was I got your attention by asking a question, and then I said, this could relate to you because you might love it and you don't even know it. So you always want to motivate your audience to listen, give them a reason to care, and in doing so, then you set up the topic. By this time, I'm like, there's something about this speech that's going to be about cabbage. And then I state my thesis. If you were giving an informative or persuasive speech at this time, the thesis would involve or lead to a preview of main points. That's a roadmap for the speech, so I know where the speech is going. I want you to think of the outline or the structure of a speech as this. The introduction tells you what you're going to tell us. The body of the speech tells us, and the conclusion tells us what you told us. It's very repetitive, but there's a purpose to that. Because when a person's listening, they can't turn back the page and reread anything. You've got to continually remind your audience where you are and what you're talking about. Because people's minds wander, and that's called what kind of noise? Remember? If you're thinking about other things, what's that called? What? Psychological noise, thank you, okay? So that's a good introduction. Then you've got the body of the speech. In this case, the body is probably going to be some steps, a kind of a chronological approach. You do this, then you do this, then you do this, and you're going to construct it with all of the developing content. So you've got the body next. This marker is awesome. And we will be revisiting the outline, obviously. But the next is the conclusion. I want you to think of the conclusion here, body, as the introduction in reverse. Because you're going to restate the thesis, review the points, and provide closure. And a lot of times the best way to provide closure is to tie back to whatever it is you did to get our attention. So you say, maybe you thought you didn't love cabbage, but I bet after you taste one of these cabbage rolls, you will. And that's it. And you don't then, the other two beautiful things that you're not going to do, they're not beautiful. You're not going to do them so your conclusion is beautiful, is you're not going to say anything like, that's it, I'm done, that's all I have, thank you, none of that. You just end the speech, and just like when you're ending a conversation with someone, you have a tone of voice and a cadence that changes as you end things. So you're not going to say, thanks, that's it, I'm done. You shouldn't have to. But you're also not going to say, in conclusion. And you may have been taught to do that. Don't do it. It's redundant, and it's obvious. It should be obvious. If you're restating the thesis and reviewing your main points and providing closure, you shouldn't have to tell us you're at the conclusion. Like you wouldn't start the introduction by saying, to introduce, so don't say in conclusion. An introduction, no. So please don't say in conclusion, please. If I break you of that, we'll throw me to death. So that is constructing the speech. Introduction, body, conclusion. Where's mine? Okay, let me write here. Number 3, because you got to have, oh God, it's like 3. Anyway, the third step is organizing the speech. So organize. There we go. The fourth is develop the language you want to use. And that may sound kind of silly, but it means think about not just what you're going to say, but how you're going to say it. You want to speak plainly. You don't want to use words that your audience won't understand. You want to relate the topic to your audience, and you can do that depending on what kind of language you use. Remember, there's another kind of noise where your audience doesn't understand the words you're saying. What's that called? Anyone remember? Semantic noise. You don't want to make your audience not understand what you're saying. And this is another huge part of at least a week of the class is spin on language. So we'll revisit this again. But you want to develop the language that you're going to use. And if this is the process you're going through to get ready for a speech, I choose my topic, I develop the content, I organize it, I choose my language. What do you think the fifth and final step is? Practice it. Oh, yes. Practice. The first time you give a speech should not be in front of an audience. It shouldn't be the first time you turn on the video, the recorder. It should be that you've practiced it, and you've practiced it like you'd actually give it. You're not just practicing it in the car or in the shower, but you're doing it standing up as if you would actually give the speech. That's when you catch yourself moving around too much. or not looking at your audience, or mumbling, or using too many filler words. Practice takes care of all that, and it also really helps with your fear of speaking. So what you're going to do this week is ponder these 5 steps, and then decide which you think is the most important to you, or if it's not even the most important, which do you think is the most difficult, and write a little bit about that on that discussion board. What questions do you have about the 5 steps? Okay. Want to talk to you a little bit about the preparation outline, which we will go, in fact, hang on just a second. I can pull it out for you. I'll show you. This is a template from pre-pandemic when we did the demonstration speech, but this will be the same thing. You can see I would put this on Blackboard for you. These are the components of the preparation outline that you have to turn in. You'll see, and I mean, you really can just, if you can make your own, but you can just fill in the blanks and save it and send it to me like that. But it is, the first you say the general purpose, which would be what? To inform. The specific purpose, which is what you want the audience to be able to do. And you write these out completely. This part you do. The thesis you write out completely. That's the message you want to send. And then in the introduction, it's supposed to be completely written out. Now, am I going to be looking at your outline and seeing if you follow it exactly? No. I'm not looking at anything but you when you give your speech. But it does need to be written out so that I can see you have all 4 components of a good introduction. You capture our attention, you tell us why it matters, you state your thesis and preview your points, okay? Then in the body of the outline, it can be as elaborate as you want it to be, but it does not have to be super duper elaborate. But here are the specifications. You have to write your main points and subpoints out in complete sentences. And all I'm looking for is that you have at least 2 subpoints under each main point. Now, in the demonstration speech, you might have more than 3 main points. Like you might not be able to break it into 3 chunks, then that's fine. But for your main points, you should have 2 subpoints. And here's the rule of outlining. If you have 1 subpoint, you have to have a second one. Otherwise, there's no reason to break it into a subpoint. You see, if you have a subpoint A, he's very lonely without subpoint B. Okay, so A's cannot stand alone. They got to have a B. And you use Roman numerals. So I don't want to see regular numbers. I want Roman numerals. This is not, and this is departmental specification. Okay, so Roman numerals, and you clearly state your main point in a complete sentence. You cannot just put a word. Now, if you had like a list of ingredients or something, and you have a subpoint 1, here, these ingredients, then you could just list the ingredients. You don't have to write the first ingredient is, the second ingredient is. But you do have to write your main points and those main subpoints out in complete sentences. Okay? You'll get points off if you don't do that, so please do that. Then you're asked to write out your transitions, and that's what leads you from one point to the next. So if I have my first point, I'd say, in addition to this point, the next step is something so that you don't just abruptly go point 2. You don't want to do that. You want to have, and we'll talk more about transitions, of course, and internal summaries and internal previews, that you write out your transitions completely. And that's to force you to have transitions, really. Okay, and then you move on down here, and you write out your conclusion completely, just like you do your introduction. And that's your preparation outline. That's like, I think it's 25 points, and it's something that you submit with the process speech, the informative speech, and the persuasive speech. And it is submitted to Safe Assign, and that's where I look to see if you're stealing, which I know you wouldn't do. Okay? So we've covered pages 20 through 40 of the text. And each component that we've gone through today, we will spend probably a week on. But it's giving you a preview. You're going to think of your topic for your process speech, and you're going to write me a little ditty about which one of these you think is the most important. That's due by Friday. The topic is due by Sunday. Okay? And the process speech will be due the 27th of September. Okay?